Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast and the finale of the Mike Tyson Career Profile. I'm your host, Sean, and this is part 9, the final part of Mike Tyson's Career Profile. It's been one hell of a journey, a very educating journey, I must say. A lot of great stories throughout these 9 episodes, and in this final part, we obviously pick up where we left off in 1999. He had his fight against Francis Beaufort, but there was also an incident which will lead to further stories in this episode. Now, this final episode will, of course, cover that period of his life, all the way leading up to his fight with Jake Paul. Yes, we are going to cover that at the end of the show as well. Now, just to recap on the previous episode, of course, we was talking about Mike coming out of prison, his life outside of prison, his fights with Evander Holyfield, the aftermath of being suspended and having his license taken away, then, of course, him looking to get his license back and get back in the ring. It wouldn't be Mike without Mike, and there was incidents outside of the ring, which will lead to more in this final part. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go back into the story of Mike Tyson's career profile. Now, there was intrigue with Mike's team. Shelley and Shawnee had gotten together and actually ganged up on Jeff and Irving. Jeff was still recuperating from his surgery, and he had to go back to LA to co-produce Roseanne Barr's new show, so he pretty much left the picture. Mike's career was in the hands of Shelley, Shawnee and Jackie Rowe, and the Maryland judicial system. Mike showed up in a small court in Rockville on February the 5th, 1999. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit and a black vest. Monica was there with him, along with at least a dozen of Mike's lawyers and advisors. Now, Mike had pleaded no contest to the charges, and his attorneys had worked out a deal that would avoid jail time. Mike just pays a fine, is put on probation, and he's ordered to do community service. But then, things got a bit hairy again. The new district attorney, Doug Gansler, and his assistant prosecutor, Carol Crawford, showed up in court with an 11-page document that made Mike sound like he was a Nazi war criminal. Crawford especially seemed to loathe him. She was a very masculine-looking woman with a severe short haircut. She seemed hell-bent on taking out her anger towards all men on Mike. He was the showpiece. Instead of keeping up their end of the deal, these two fools trotted out every derogatory thing they could pin on him, including quotes from Teddy Atlas saying that Cuss had spoiled Mike as a kid. They quoted from his own interviews, including the Playboy interview from 1998, where Mike told Mark Cram, the writer, that he was a very hateful motherfucker who would blow one day. They then cited Cram himself when he wrote that Mike was the darkest figure in sports that he had ever encountered. Judge Johnson sentenced Mike to 2 years in jail, with 1 year suspended, and fined him $5,000 and ordered him to serve 2 years probation and perform 2,000 hours of community service. He also denied Mike bail if he appealed the decision. The standing room only courtroom filled with shocked gasps. Mike was stunned. Monica started crying hysterically. They slapped handcuffs on Mike and took him right to jail. Gansler was getting his 15 minutes of fame. People were actually outraged that Mike could be sent to jail for a year after he had reached a plea deal for no time with the old state attorney. Gansler told the Associated Press, "Any prosecutor would do what I did. People are going to say what they're going to say." They threw Mike in a 5.5 foot by 8 foot cell in cell block 2, which was their version of protective custody. That meant Mike was separated from the inmate population, who were mostly white privileged kids from Montgomery County. Mike's unit was isolated with just a few people who were either too weak to be in population or too aggressive. Mike begged them to put him in population. He needed to be out there to work the system to get his privileges. Mike was raised that way. Instead, he was in protective custody, and the guards were coming around and taking pictures of him and selling them to the papers. Mike was in for 2 weeks when he got sent to their version of the hole. It started when they sent some prison psychologist to see him. Mike was seeing Dr. Goldberg, one of the best psychiatrists in the country. So Mike refused to even talk to this other psychiatrist that was being sent to him. He actually cut Mike's normal dose of Zoloft in half. When they came with a different looking pill, Mike refused to take it. 2 days later, Mike was in the day room on the phone when a particularly sadistic guard came in and hung up the phone in the middle of his conversation. Mike was a different person in jail. He was more fastidious than he was at home. One little thing went wrong, and Mike was ready to go off the hinges and tear it up. He got enraged and he pulled the TV set off its metal bracket and threw it on the floor, then picked it up and chucked it at the bars of the cell where the warden and 2 guards were observing him from behind. A small piece of plastic broke off and went through the bar and hit one of the guards. The guards immediately sent Mike to administrative segregation. Mike was locked up for 23 hours of the day and wasn't allowed to buy snacks from the canteen or have visits or telephone calls except from his lawyers or doctors. After the TV incident, the jail administration charged Mike with disorderly conduct, destruction of property, and assault on a corrections officer because the little plastic shard had hit him. They threw Mike in the hole, and he wasn't a happy camper. Mike thought he was one of those Bader-Meinhof German political prisoners who would go crazy when they were put in jail. They'd kill guards, they'd kill themselves. Mike even started wearing a little Spanish bandana on his head and was butt naked, throwing things at the guards. They sentenced Mike to 25 days in isolation, but his lawyer appealed and Mike got out after 5 days. Mike really didn't like this prison. He wanted to be sent back to Indiana. He had nobody to work with in this jail, nobody to bring him stuff and get the girls. Mike was still on probation there, so they could have easily yanked him back. The problem was that they could make him serve the last 4 years of his previous sentence. Jim Voiles, Mike's Indiana lawyer, made about 20 trips back and forth from Maryland and finally reached a deal where Mike would serve an extra 60 days in jail at Maryland and Indiana would wash their hands of him forever. Judge Gifford was more than happy to sign off on that. Nobody wanted Mike back in Indiana. Mike was pissed. He wanted to sue the judge to get back there. But when he settled into jail in Maryland, it turned out to not be too bad. Monica started cooking for him and he was allowed to have the food sent in. After a few months, Mike started gaining so much weight that he asked them if he could bring in his treadmill and a stationary bike, and they let him. Mike was always the privileged prick in prison. He started mingling with the other guys in protective custody. There were a number of young kids who were in there for murder. 2 of them even hung themselves while Mike was in there. One guy was a wealthy Israeli kid and the other a black kid. Mike paid for the black kid's funeral because his parents didn't have much money. It broke his heart to see these young, beautiful kids from privileged families getting caught up in drugs and then doing something like murdering someone over $100. When Mike left that jail, there must have been $12,000 on his books. So Mike had the prison split that money up among the 5 guys who were in isolation with him. They weren't tough guys. They were little kids who had no money, who were never going to go home. Mike sort of became the protective custody don at that place. The other guys would send messages to him through the guards and ask Mike to talk to them about their problems. Some of the guards would come to him and tell him about a kid who might be having a problem, and Mike would send him a message and tell him to chill out. He didn't get many visitors in jail in Maryland. Monica came, Craig Boogie came, some of the friends dropped in. His Jamaican girlfriend Lisa came. She had written her name in the visitor's log, and Monica came a few hours later and saw her name and threw a shit fit. Thank God that they had the little glass window separating him. But the visitor who got the most attention when he came was John F. Kennedy Jr. He came to visit Mike one night. When the word got out, 10 news teams showed up and waited outside for hours. Inside it was pandemonium. Mike had John say hello to all the other inmates in isolation with him. John and Mike were friends from New York. Mike met him on the street one day and he invited him up to see him at his George magazine office. John was a down-to-earth man, riding his bike around Manhattan, taking public transportation sometimes. And the first thing he told Mike when he came to see him was, "My whole family told me not to come and see you. So when you see them and they're all saying hi to you, you get the picture." They talked about the Kennedy family a lot, especially his grandfather, but he didn't seem to know that much about him, other than he didn't teach any of his sons anything about business. He said, "Nobody in my family knows how to run a business. That's why they all went into politics. He wanted us to be pampered guys." Mike's guess, that's why he was doing his magazine, to learn the business end. He felt that he had no accomplishments in life, and that was the one thing that he could point to. At one point, Mike just flat out said to him, "You know, you've got to run for political office." "What?" he said. "Do you think so?" "You'd be letting my mother down. My mother's people down," Mike said. "They saw you under that desk. You can't let a lost generation that believes so much in your family down." "Not me. Fuck me. I'm going to do what I do. But you can't let those people down. Your father and your uncle were their hope, and you're the bloodline to that hope." He didn't say anything. Maybe he thought Mike was crazy. Mike carried on. "No, man, you've got to do this shit. Are you crazy? What's the purpose of you even living? That's what you were born to do. People's dreams are riding on you, man. That's a heavy burden, but you shouldn't have had that mother and father you did." He would have made a great politician. He really cared about the people. You could tell it wasn't some phony baloney shit, just the way he really engaged with people, really catching the eyes of people he didn't know. He wasn't scared to be seen out in public. He was out there looking to engage. Of course, Mike made the pitch to get out right then. He had been in jail for almost 4 months already. And that was enough time, Mike thought. One of John's cousins, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, RFK's oldest daughter, was the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland at the time. "Get me out of here," Mike begged. "Ask your fucking cousin." "Mike, I don't really know her," he replied. Maybe he was sophisticated enough not to say anything in that visiting room. Mike replied, "You don't know her? What the fuck do you mean? You all play football together up there in Hyannisport." He smiled and then left. The media surrounded him when he got out. "I'm here in support of my friend," John said. "Mike's a much different man than his public image would suggest. He's a man who was really putting his life back together and has an opportunity to do so in the future. I hope perhaps coming here and telling folks that, people might start to believe it because he's had a difficult life." Then he got into his limo and drove to Mike's house to get some coffee. Shortly after John was there, Mike got out of jail. And as soon as Mike got out of jail, the very first day, he went home, packed a bag, and went to New York. Mike didn't hang out and spend time with his family like he should have done. He got in the car and drove to New York to see one of his girlfriends. Mike just didn't have the skills or tools to be a responsible person, or the desire. You can't have one foot in a marriage and the other foot in the gutter. Having all those girlfriends while he was married was like a drug in itself. And if he needed some more, he just walked down the street and women would throw themselves at him. Mike was a slave addicted to the chaos of celebrity. He wished he could stop it, but he couldn't. Nothing in Mike's life was pretty back then. His new business guys had negotiated new deals with Showtime and the MGM Grand because Don wasn't in the picture anymore. But Mike was still unangry for all those millions that Showtime had advanced him, and that wound up in Don's pocket. And the IRS was still on his back. Mike had moved to Phoenix to start training for his next fight. And at the beginning of June, Mike started doing community service at the infamous Sheriff Joe Appario's jail in Phoenix. They were thrilled to have him there. Mike would walk around their tent city and talk to the prisoners and tell them to stay out of trouble. Meanwhile, Mike's probation officers were treating him like he was John Gotti. They tried to write him up every chance they got. If they heard a rumour that Mike was out at a club, they'd call his lawyer, and Mike and his lawyer have to get witnesses to then dispute it. Mike finally got back into the ring in Vegas on October the 23rd, 1999, and his opponent was all in Norris. Now, back when Mike was a champ, he didn't know who this guy was, but he used to show up at Mike's press conferences and just stare all crazy at him. He fought on some of Mike's undercards, but Mike didn't recognise him. Mike was thinking, this guy might have a gun. Who is this guy? Did I talk shit to him or win all his money on a dice game? Mike legitimately had a fear. Nobody had ever had the balls to do that to Mike. He just stared at him and didn't say anything. Mike thought he was probably someone he had wronged in the streets. Orlin had actually been the WBA Cruiserweight champion, so he did know how to fight. And they felt each other out in the first round, and right at the bell, Mike hit him with a left uppercut that sent him down. Referee Richard Steele deducted 2 points from Mike for hitting after the bell, but it didn't matter. Norris went back to his corner and sat on his stool and didn't get up. He claimed that he'd injured his right knee when he went down and couldn't continue. The crowd started booing and throwing things around, and the next thing you knew, there were 50 uniformed cops in the ring. Mike was in good shape, and he would have applied that heat and knocked him out in the next round most likely, but Norris wouldn't get off his stool. Norris essentially quit. And that was another black mark on Mike's name in Vegas. They ruled it a no contest. Mike didn't realise it at the time, but that was the last time he'd ever be in a ring in Las Vegas. Jelly Finkel thought that it might be better for Mike to fight outside of the United States for a while and let Vegas calm down after the Norris fiasco. So, he set up a fight for Mike in Manchester, England, on January the 29th, 2000. Mike was going to meet Julius Francis, the British heavyweight champion. England was a trip. Mike was mobbed everywhere he went. When Mike visited the ghetto in Brixton, there were so many adoring fans swarming him that he had to take refuge in a police station. It might have been the first time in Mike's life that he entered a police station voluntarily. Mike had met an awesome Russian girl at this hotel who saw his jewellery and told him to visit her at Graf Diamonds, the highest end jewellery store in the world. She worked there translating for the Russian businessmen and their wives when they visited the store. Mike went there with his fight promoter, Frank Warren, who, of course, is the Don King of England, some say. She waited on him, and she started flirting. She asked Mike what it was like as a boy, and he told her. I used to rob people and steal. Stop playing, she said. No, really, I broke into people's houses and robbed people at gunpoint. Mike also picked up the girl and slept with her a few times before he had to go to Manchester to fight. He wasn't really worried about the fight. You could see that Francis wasn't really training seriously. He came in at 243 pounds. He had gone to some army camp to get in shape, and he got fatter. Mike doesn't think that the English press thought much of Francis' chances. The London Daily Mirror gave him $50,000 to put an ad for their paper on the bottom of his boxing shoes. They got the money's worth. Mike knocked Francis down 5 times in the first 4 minutes of the fight before the referee stopped it. In June, Mike was back in Phoenix training for his next fight. Mike was in a really bad mood, and he was taking it out on his probation officer, who was a really nice woman. But Mike didn't get thrown back in jail, thanks to one of the greatest lawyers he ever came across. His name was Darrow Sol, and he was a Jewish man, a former Green Beret. He didn't look like a badass. He was big, but not muscular big. He was solid. They really bonded. Darrow was a really smart lefty, ACLU type guy. He told Mike his father had been killed by one of these white Aryan supremacists, but he would still defend Aryan Nation guys. Darrow would take up the cases of the black guys who were on death row unjustly and not even charge them, even though he was broke to the teeth half the time. He was connected in the Phoenix law scene and helped smooth out a lot of stuff for Mike over the years. Mike's probation officer, Erica, was trying to get him to do more community service, but 2 different places refused to take him. So Mike yelled at her a couple of times on the phone, but Darrow chilled her out and told her that medication problems were causing his bad behaviour. Now Mike's English promoters were worried about the lawsuit from the stripper. If Mike had a bad probation report, he might not have been allowed back into the UK to fight Lou Savarese. Mike was due to leave on June 16th, but he was back in New York because of one of his best friends, Darryl Baum, got murdered on June the 10th. People called him Homicide, but Mike called him by his original street name, Shorty Love. He hated that name because he hated anything that would make him seem soft and vulnerable. Shorty Love was from Mike's neighbourhood, and he had a really notorious street rep for hurting people. Mike would always see him hanging around with the tough guys in the neighbourhood. These guys were damn near grown, and he was just a little kid. But it was like he was the leader. So Mike got on that plane to England to make his fight. Once Mike got to Scotland, his mood lifted. The fight was in Glasgow, and the reception for Mike there was overwhelming. Mike was doing some cocaine before the fight and smoked some pot. There was no problem with the blow because that leaves your system right away, but for the pot, which stays in your system, Mike had to use his whizzer, which was a fake penis where you put someone else's clean urine in to pass the drug test. Jeff Wall's assistant, Steve Thomas, used to travel with Mike and contribute. Mike was as high as a kite the day before the fight. They dressed Mike up in a kilt, and Mike saluted the crowd from the top of a Mercedes-Benz. He was jumping up and down on the roof of the car, screaming, "Champion! Champion!" And the people just went crazy. Savarese was an interesting opponent for Mike. He wasn't a tomato can. He had gone the distance and lost a split decision to George Foreman in 1997, and in 1998 he knocked out Buster Douglas in 1 round. He had 32 KOs in 42 bouts, but Mike didn't think he'd pose any problem for him. The bell rang and Savarese went down from Mike's first punch, a looping left that hit him up on the temple. Savarese got up and Mike was all over him. He was on his way down again when the ref got in between them. Mike didn't realise that the ref was actually stopping the fight, so he kept punching, and Mike accidentally hit the ref with a left hook and knocked him down. The British broadcasters later joked that particular ref could never take a punch. Mike was one of those spoiled brat fighters. He thought he could get away with things like hitting the ref and not getting in trouble. But this particular time, Mike really wasn't trying to hit the ref. He was just being mean until he hurt Savarese. Back in the States, Mike's parole officer worried about his comments after the Savarese fight and about an alleged confrontation with the promoter of the fight, Frank Warren. Darrow smoothed it all out. Mike was even allowed to associate with UE. One of the conditions of his parole was to see a psychiatrist, so Mike met with Dr. Barksdale and his associate in Tempe, Arizona. The meeting didn't go so well, but once again, Darrow came to the rescue. On August 22nd, Mike was fined $187,500 for accidentally hitting the referee in Glasgow. It was the largest fine in UK history. Mike looked at it as a value-added tax. Besides, Mike was getting ready to make $20 million from fighting Andrew Golota, the foul Pole. Golota, a huge gentleman of Polish descent, had the reputation of being one of the dirtiest fighters in boxing. He was ahead in 2 fights with Riddick Bowe when he was disqualified for repeated low blows. Mike had gone to the same special ed school as Bowe, so he was really psyched to win a fight for him. The Golota fight was in Detroit on October the 20th. The night before the fight, Mike was really nervous. When he saw Golota in person at the weigh-in, he freaked out. He was really big and crazy, and he had big red bumps all over his back. Mike said, "What the fuck am I doing here fighting this big crazy guy?" He kept thinking while he was lying in bed trying to sleep. So Mike lit up a joint, and as soon as he took his first toke, his whole mood changed. Fuck that man, Mike thought. Now in the fight, during the first round, Mike went to Golota's body a lot, and Mike could sense him breaking down. He was moving pretty fluidly, and he was working off his jab. Jab in the face, boom boom, then some punches to the body. Golota was keeping his left hand low. He threw a weak jab, and Mike went under him, and boom, he cut his left eye with a punch. With about 10 seconds to go in the round, Mike got in a solid right hand, and Golota went down. Mike went after him at the beginning of the second round. Golota was still swinging wild punches that were missing, but Mike got in some punishment to Golota's body. By the end of the round, he was just retreating and just slapping his punches at Mike. Mike was up and ready for round 3 to start when he couldn't believe his eyes. Golota was fighting with his corner. Mike watched the Showtime feed later, and Golota didn't want to go out for another round, but his cornerman, the small old Italian guy Al Certo, was screaming at him, "Throw your fucking right hand, I'm stopping the fight," Golota said. Certo wasn't finished. When Golota got back to his corner, Certo tried to stuff his mouthpiece in and push him back out, but Golota had had enough. He put on his robe and rushed out of the ring. On the way to the dressing room, he was pelted with all kinds of shit, and someone threw an orange soda at him and hit his whole body when it turned orange. Afterwards, Golota tried to blame his quitting on getting dizzy from headbutts, but he just quit on his stool. He was one of those fighters who just went nuts from the pressure of fighting. But the next day, Golota's wife took him to a hospital in Chicago, and the doctor diagnosed him with a concussion and a fractured left cheekbone, the one that was the target of the right hand that floored him. As soon as Mike got back to his dressing room, the Michigan officials rushed in to take a urine test, so Mike didn't have time to get the whizzer from Steve Thomas. He had to give him his own urine. Of course, they found weed in his system. They should have given him a bonus for fighting under pot because it dulls your aggression. So they suspended Mike for 90 days, which didn't matter because he wasn't going to fight anyway. But they also fined him $5,000 and made him donate $200,000 to a Michigan-based charity. And they took away his TKO and changed it to a no decision. Even with that $20 million from the fight, Mike was down financially. It got so bad that he started hustling some Malaysian promoters who wanted him to fight over there. They sent this lady named Rose Chu to convince Mike, and she spent weeks at his house. They offered Mike a site fee of $16 million, and they gave him $1 million advance, and Mike even got them to spend $200,000 on renovations to his house and a down payment for a new Rolls Royce. At the beginning of 2001, Mike's accountant sent him a cash flow breakdown for the year 2000. Mike had started the year with $3.3 million in the hole. He earned $65.7 million in 2000, including a $20 million settlement from Sidley, Mike's former business manager. They were happy to settle. The problem was that Mike spent $62 million that year. $8 million for taxes, $5.1 million for legal fees, $5 million to Monica, $4.1 million to repay a loan from one of his promoters, $3.9 million to Kevin Rooney for his suit, $3.4 million in payroll, $2.1 million for cars, $1.8 million in fusion into Iron Mike Records. Obviously, all that stuff adds up. But he couldn't care less about business. He wanted to deal with his vices and nothing else. Mike's attitude was, I don't give a fuck. Why would he think like that when he was at the top of his game? The sad truth is that no one ever had Mike's best interests at heart except for Cus D'Amato. Mike still can't believe that Cus put that money aside for him in an IRA. When Mike thought about that, he'd cry to himself, and he still thinks about that to this day. Well, things didn't get any better for Mike in June of 2001 when Camille died. Mike plunged deeper into depression and took more drugs. But he had to start training for his next fight, which was going to be in Denmark. So they set up camp at Big Bear City in San Bernardino County, California. Monica and the kids came to stay with him for a few days. The day after they left, Rick Bowers, one of Mike's security guys, and they went down to the local Kmart because that was the only place in town to get certain provisions. There was an older woman, maybe 50 or so, at one of the cash registers. She was far from a looker, but she had a dynamite body. She asked Mike for an autograph when they was checking out, and then slipped him a phone number. The dog that he is, Mike called her, and she came over to the house that Rick and Mike were staying in. Mike had a little drama on the flight to Copenhagen for the Brian Nielsen fight. Crocodile started throwing up, and then he passed out. Crocodile had OD'd. They rushed him to the hospital. 3 days went by, and Mike actually thought that Crocodile had died. But when Mike went to the weigh-in, Crocodile showed up like nothing had happened. He was just one of those guys who could do drugs night and day, and then stop cold turkey and go train a fighter for 6 weeks. Then he'd come back and get high like nothing happened. When Mike gets high, he has to be arrested to stop. Mike had Darrow along with him on that trip. Shortly after they got there, one of those big Danish biker types said something to Anthony Pitt's wife, and Darrow just turned around, boom, knocked the guy out cold with one punch. He actually beat Anthony to that punch. Mike said, "This is the best. I've got my lawyer and my fucking bodyguard with me at the same time." Denmark went crazy over them. They sold out the huge arena in no time. Mike hadn't fought in over a year at this point, and he figured that he could get some rounds in with Nielsen. Nielsen was the IBC champ at the time, but it was pretty meaningless. They called him Super Brian, and his record was 62-1, but he really hadn't fought any high-caliber fighters in their prime. Nielsen had beaten James Bone Crusher Smith, Tim Witherspoon and Larry Holmes, but they were well on the way down when he met them. But he was a big boy at 6'4" and 260 pounds, so Mike had a big target to aim at. Mike punished him with body blows in the first round of the fight, and with seconds to go in the third, he knocked him down with a series of devastating combinations. Nielsen went down like a redwood tree. If the ropes hadn't cushioned his fall, Mike thought Nielsen would have split the ring in two. It was only the second time in his long career that he'd been down. Mike was having a good time in the ring. He had, of course, put on some weight because he was heavy, but in reality, he hadn't trained much for the fight. He came in at 239 pounds, his heaviest fighting weight ever, so Mike wanted to get some rounds in. He battered Nielsen around the ring for 6 rounds. At the beginning of the 7th, Nielsen just stayed on his stool. He had a cut over his left eye, and Mike had been working it all night. Nielsen told the ref he couldn't see out of the eye, but he was really just worn out. But he was a nice guy. Nobody liked him because he was really arrogant, but Mike related to him. Once the fight was over, Mike went into full party mode. He had a big suite. Crocodile and Mike got some weed and some booze, and they had some girls come up. The girls were normal, straight girls, not hookers or dancers, just 9-to-5 corporate types. After a few days of partying in Copenhagen, everyone went back home. But Crocodile and Mike stayed and partied all over Europe for the next 2 months. They went to Amsterdam and smoked the whole time. That was where Mike finally learned how to roll a blunt. Mike was so high and still tired from the fight, so they just got some girls up to their massive suites in the hotel and stayed in there for most of the time. From Amsterdam, they went to Barcelona. They were all over the place. But then one of Mike's trainers started calling Crocodile, telling him to get Mike back home. So they eventually went back. Mike hung around New York for a while, and he took Crocodile to Brownsville to see his old neighborhood. Crocodile was driving one of Mike's Rolls Royces around, and it was midnight, and they pulled over to a corner. About 100 guys came up to the car, and they were losing it. They were just so happy to see Mike. So, the negotiations to fight Lennox Lewis were now in their final stages, and they were set to meet in April 2002. So Mike decided to party a little bit more before he started to train. Less than a week after the Mitchell Road street fight, Mike took 2 young female street girls on vacation to Jamaica. Mike was still sick, and he was losing weight when he got back to the States. So the first thing Mike did was call to make an appointment to see a doctor. In Mike's head, he felt like he might have had HIV, AIDS. So he started calling all his friends to say goodbye to them. He even called Monica and told her that he had AIDS and that he was going to die. Mike went to a Spanish doctor, and they did the test, and he came back negative. Mike was also worry-free, and he had a huge fight in a few months with Lennox Lewis for the heavyweight title. And he was travelling around in Jamaica and Cuba, not even training, just living a crazy drug-fueled life. Monica, with no surprises, filed for divorce. Mike guessed she'd had enough of his fooling around, because Mike sure did a lot of it. Calling to tell her that he had AIDS probably didn't help either, and the fact that Mike had just had a baby boy with this stripper in Phoenix was of course the icing on the cake. He couldn't blame Monica. What kind of marriage was it, where Mike could be with 5 different girls a night and then just send her money? Mike had met another one of his baby mamas, Shelley, at a strip club in Phoenix. Mike really liked Shelley. She kept her house immaculate and she did a lot of stuff with him. She was a fitness freak, so when they worked out and went running, she'd run with him. Mike ran 5 miles, Shelley ran 10. She'd always one-up him. One time, Mike's assistant Darryl and Mike were throwing around 15-pound medicine ball, and Shelley got in on the action. She and Mike threw the ball 250 times, and Mike got sore, but she kept on throwing it with Darryl. This 90-pound Mexican chick must have done 500 throws. She wore them out. Shelley tried to work on their relationship. She'd talk to Hope and get tips from her on how to keep Mike happy. When she got pregnant with Miguel, Mike had no idea how he could take care of another kid. He was broken in debt. She kept saying she was going to get an abortion, but she didn't. The Lennox Lewis fight was originally scheduled for April, so Mike didn't have much time to stop doing coke and weed and start training in earnest. He was still high on coke when he flew to New York to do the big press conference with Lennox on January the 22nd. Now, if you've not listened to our legendary nights on the tale of Tyson and Lewis, or Lewis and Tyson, please do go and listen to that. It's a very good accompanying episode with more information around that fight. But when he got to New York, they did the big press conference, and they had them facing each other on slightly elevated platforms on a big stage at the Hudson Theatre. The Showtime announcer, Jimmy Lennon Jr., introduced each one of them like it was a real fight. As soon as Lewis was announced, Mike lost his mind. He looked over at Lennox and wanted to hit him, so Mike got off his platform, went up to Lennox. Mike guessed he was expecting trouble because Lennox had about 10 huge guys hiding in the wings, so as soon as Mike did that, they all came rushing out. Mike was only there with a few of his bodyguards, Anthony and Rick and his trainers, and also Shelley Finkel. The Lewis camp must have thought that they'd see these big guys and run. Because of the fracas at the Lewis press conference, the Nevada officials voted 4-1 to deny Mike a license to fight there. Why was everything his fault, he thought? Now they had to find a new venue, and the fight was postponed until June, which gave Mike not more time to train, but more time to get high. He went to Hawaii for his training camp, and that alone really should give you an indication of how much training he really did and how motivated he was for this fight. The epicenter of some of the baddest weed in the world was there. Mike is just smoking his brains out. Even the prospects of getting the belt back didn't mean much to him by then. He just wasn't focused at all. He was obviously really messed up at this point, big time. That's why he was doing the weed. Shelley Finkel had gotten rid of Crocodile and Tommy Brooks, and they had brought in a new trainer, Ronnie Shields. Crocodile came to the fight and stopped in to see Mike before it began. Mike grabbed Crocodile tight and hugged him. "Croc, I'm so tired," he said. When they were making the introductions in the ring, They cut it in half with 20 yellow-shirted security guards who formed a war between Mike and Lennox. The fight started, and Mike was so aggressive in the first round, stalking Lennox around the ring and making him hold Mike so much that the referee had to warn him. But after that round, something strange happened. Mike just stopped fighting. It was as if his mind had just shut down. Ronnie Shields and his other trainer, Stacey McKinley, were shouting instructions at the same time, but Mike didn't hear a word of either of them. It was very hot in the arena, and Mike got dehydrated. He couldn't seem to start. As the rounds progressed, Mike stood there in front of Lennox and got hit. Mike knew he wasn't in any condition to beat anybody, especially a fighter of Lennox's skill level. Mike had only fought 19 rounds in the past 5 years. All those years of snorting coke and drinking and smoking weed and screwing around with massive amounts of women. Well, it had all finally taken its toll. A lot of Mike's close friends and associates thought that Mike had been drugged during the fight because he seemed so passive. He was just in such a weird mood, and it was just hard for him to throw punches. It was as if all of those heroes, those boxing gods, those old-time fighters had deserted Mike, or Mike had deserted them. All of his heroes were miserable bastards, and Mike emulated them his whole career, 100%. But Mike was never really one of those guys. He wished he was, but he wasn't. By then, Mike had spent years in therapy with different psychiatrists, and the whole purpose of his therapy was to curb all his appetites, including his appetite for destruction, the one that had made him Iron Mike. Iron Mike had brought Mike too much pain, too many lawsuits, too much hate from the public, the stigma that he was a rapist, that he was public enemy number one. Each punch Mike took from Lewis in the later rounds chipped away at that pose and that persona, and Mike was a willing participant in its destruction. It went 8 rounds, and Mike got tagged with a solid right hand and he went down. Mike was bleeding from cuts over both of his eyes and from his nose. The referee counted Mike out. Jim Gray interviewed both of them at the same time after the fight. During the interview, Emmanuel Stewart, Lennox's trainer, interrupted Gray. "I'm still one of Mike's biggest fans. He's given me so many thrills going back to Roderick Moore. You've given us all a lot of excitement. He's the most exciting heavyweight in the last 50 years. Jim Gray asked, "How sorry are you guys that this fight didn't happen many years ago when you, Mike, were at your best and you, Lennox, weren't quite as old either?" Lennox was starting to answer and Mike wiped some of the blood off Lennox's cheek. Lennox said, "Heavyweights mature at different times. Mike Tyson was a natural at 19. Nothing stood in his way and he ruled the planet at that time. But I'm like fine wine. I came along later and I took my time and now I'm ruling." Jim Gray then stepped in again and asked, "Mike, are you sorry that this fight didn't take place years ago?" Mike said, "It wasn't meant to be. I've known Lennox since he was 16. I have mad respect for him. Everything I said was to promote the fight. He knows that I love him and his mother, and if he thinks that I don't love and respect him, then he's crazy." And as soon as the fight was over, Mike got right back to his vices. He had met an attractive Dominican girl named Luz. She had come to the Lewis fight with some other guys, and they started hanging out. She lived in Spanish Harlem in New York, and Mike moved in with her that fall. And he was right back in his environment. Abandoned buildings, the dope man on the street, people ODing, a fat lady was pushing an addicted newborn down an alley, guys with beers shooting at one another. That's Mike's element. It was bad for Mike to be in his element, but once he was there, his senses sharpened. Mike was paranoid, on the move. He was in survival mode. Once Mike moved into Spanish Harlem, he became Brownsville Mike again. People were feeding him. His drugs were free. Mike started hanging out in the drug dens. How did he get from slapping a man 5 and letting him take a picture with him to being right there in the dope den where the naked women are packing the bags of coke? How did Mike get there sniffing the coke? And the man is going, "No, that shit for the dumb crackhead. This is the flakes. You've got to try the flakes, Pappy." Mike took one hit of that stuff and his eyeballs froze. Mike went down to the restaurant that was on the corner and they'd give him free food. Mike was eating all the rice and beans that they were plying him with and the liquor, and it was still early in the morning. Some of Mike's gangster friends would come and visit him. They'd be in the Rolls Royces and fancy cars. Mike was hanging with those people, and deep in his heart he knew he belonged there at the moment because that's how he felt about himself. Because in the hood it was different. People might feed him for free and give him drugs and take care of him, but if something went down, Mike was there with them. He had his vices, and the people in the neighbourhood understood his barometer. Mike was juggling at least 20 girls at the time. Sometimes the worlds collided, and he bore the brunt of it. Someone Mike was dating heard that he had been with someone else. Now, you would think that a girl would be out of her mind to put her hands on Mike Tyson, but when they got mad, they didn't give a shit. They'd hit him and scratch his face. Then when you thought that was it was all over and they'd cool down, the next thing you knew, a rock hits you in the head, and she was mad as shit all over again. Now, on January the 13th, 2003, Mike's divorce was finalised. Monica got the Connecticut house, her house, and $6.5 million from his future earnings. Eventually, she would get a lien on Mike's Vegas house. She was pretty hostile towards him at this point, but Mike didn't care about giving her the money. He's a street guy. He's going to be out there in the streets hustling. Now, even though Mike's heart wasn't in boxing anymore, Mike still had to make some money. Shelley Finkel had got Mike a fight in February on the 22nd against Clifford Etienne. A week before the fight, Mike wanted to get a tattoo, and that would become his most notorious tattoo. Mike told the artist, S. Victor Whitmill, aka Paradox, that he wanted a tattoo on his face. Mike hated his face, and he literally wanted to deface himself. Mike suggested tiny little hearts all over it. It wasn't some ploy to make him more attractive to women. Mike just wanted to cover up his face. But Victor refused to do that. He said that Mike had a good face. He came up with that Maori tribal design, and Mike told him, "You'll think about it." And the more Mike thought, the more he liked the idea of putting a tattoo that was used by warriors to scare their opponents in battle on his face. So he went with it. Mike trained much harder for this fight than the Lewis fight, and he came in under 225 pounds, 9 pounds lighter than for Lewis. Etienne had a good record, and he was in the top 10 of both conferences, but he had a weak chin. He'd been knocked down 10 times in 26 fights. Mike didn't know why he was more focused for this fight than for the fight with Lewis. He didn't know if he was coming or going. The bell rang, and Mike charged Etienne, and they came together on the ropes, and Mike pulled Etienne down on him. Mike thought that he had hurt Etienne with one of his first punches. They got up, and Mike ducked one of Etienne's punches and threw a counter that landed square on his jaw, and down he went. Mike thought that Etienne could have gotten up. He didn't think it was a great punch that could knock someone cold, but he didn't really know because it was really precise. After Etienne was counted out, Mike helped him get up, and they hugged. Mike had picked up another $5 million from the Etienne fight, but he was still in massive debt. Mike's lawsuit against Don King was still making its way through the court system, and Don was getting nervous about Mike having his day in court, so Don started reaching out to Mike. Mike didn't have any long-standing contract with Shelley Finkel, so he was a free agent of sorts at the time. Don figured he could woo Mike and show him a little cash, and he'd come back to Don and drop the lawsuit. Mike was consumed with getting money at this point. He couldn't wait years for the lawsuit to play out. Mike needed money right there and then. Instant gratification wasn't quick enough for him, so Mike reached out to Jackie Rowe to help him deal with Don. Jackie was like a pit bull. Mike would say, "Baby, get me this," and she'd go out and get it done. In April of that year, Mike had Jackie talk Don into buying him 3 Mercedes-Benzes. Mike had Don put one of them in Jackie's name, one in Lou's name, and the other in his friend Zip's name. They were playing Don, telling him that if he'd come through with the cash and the cars, maybe Mike will drop the lawsuit. So Don would set up a meeting thinking he could fool Mike into signing some new agreement to settle the case for peanuts. And Mike wound up robbing him or beating him each time. Mike was now living day to day, and he was tired of all the bullshit surrounding him. He didn't feel like there was anyone in his camp that he could trust, and he got tired of all the Machiavellian power grabs, so Mike got rid of his whole management team. So now Mike had Shelley Finkel handling what was left of his career. He had a rematch clause in his contract with Lennox Lewis, and he wanted to fight Mike again, to get another big payday. But Mike didn't want to get his ass kicked twice. If Mike was motivated and got in top shape, he had no doubt that he could have kicked Lennox. But Mike wasn't interested in boxing. He was interested in drugs. So Shelley Finkel and Lewis's people came up with the idea of Mike fighting on the undercard of Lennox's next fight. Mike would be billed as a co-headliner. Mike declined to fight on the undercard because it was a diss to him. So Mike's team turned down Lewis's offer. And they turned round and sued Mike and Don King for $385 million, claiming that King was enticing Mike to neglect the contract so he could promote Mike's next fights. Mike's only real asset left was his suit against Don. By then, Jeff Wald knew that Mike was meeting with Don and he was furious at him. Jeff told Mike that Don would keep delaying lawsuits that were filed against him until the last minute before the trial was about to start, and then he would settle. Jeff and Dale Kinsella was telling Mike that they could settle for as much as $60 million out of the $100 million Mike had sued for, and that Mike might even be able to get his fight film library back, which would be more money in the bank for Mike for years to come. All Mike had to do was hold on until their court date in September. But Mike's financial predicament was so bad that the people who were around him on a day-to-day basis were telling him to file for bankruptcy. Jackie Rowe and Mike had been hanging around Jimmy Henchman at that time, the rap entrepreneur who managed the game and was the CEO of SAR Entertainment. Jimmy brought in Barry Hankerson, a record producer who had managed Tony Braxton and R. Kelly. They were all pushing for Mike to file for bankruptcy. Hankerson had told Jackie that Mike should file a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, so Jackie actually went online and Googled Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That was what Mike was dealing with at the time. Jackie was a good person, but she was in way over her head. None of them knew anything about high finance or bankruptcy. They were just having fun and spending money. Jeff Wall was convinced that Don was working all Mike's friends, including Jackie, to influence him to file for bankruptcy. He started calling Mike a few times a day, begging him not to file, but Mike didn't believe that his friends were taking kickbacks. But when Mike looked at the mountains and mountains of bills that he couldn't pay, he decided to file. Hankerson got Mike a bankruptcy lawyer, and they filed on August the 1st. That same day, Mike went shopping on Rodeo Drive with Hankerson, Henchman, and his bodyguard Rick. Just because he filed for bankruptcy didn't mean he had zero money. Mike just didn't have $100 million to pay off his debts. Mike was still hustling deals. The media made a big deal of him shopping on Rodeo Drive, but they didn't go into the stores with him. Mike was talking to Muslim guys who ran some of these high-end clothes stores, and he pulled out his Muslim card in hopes that they would cut him a deal. The next day, all the newspapers had every little detail of Mike's finances splashed across their pages. Mike owed about $27 million, $17 million of which was for back taxes he owed the IRS and the English tax people, the HMRC. The other $10 million was for personal expenses, which included the money he owed Monica from the divorce, what he owed the banks for his mortgages, and his huge legal fees. Mike was so overwhelmed and pissed off by the whole bankruptcy thing that he just gave up his house. Mike, as we know, through this story, has been a real adaptable kind of guy. He could live in the gutter or in an elevated state. He knew all the hustles, and he was gambling with life. Even when he was in the gutter, he had his $2,000 pants and shoes on. He might not have had a nickel in his pocket, but he was still talking shit, and he was hitting on the chicks. Mike then spent some time in Phoenix with Shelley, the mother of his child. Dave Malone came down and hung out with him for a while. Mike was so poor that they were eating Frosted Flakes and Twizzlers for dinner. They had no money to do anything, so they used to sit in the backyard and watch Mike's pigeons fly. Every once in a while, Mike set up an autograph signing somewhere, and he charged $25 for an autograph just to get over the hump. He was so poor that a guy who had stolen his credit card came running out back. In August, Mike's friend Craig Boogie started negotiating a deal for him with the mixed martial arts organisation K1. Mike had nowhere to live, so the K1 team put Mike in a suite in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in LA and paid all his expenses. Mike needed that. He'd already been kicked out of every big hotel on the Strip in Vegas. In return, Mike did promotional appearances for them. Right after Mike had signed up with K1 that August, they put out a press release that Mike was going to fight Bob Sapp, a 6'5", 390-pound ex-NFL player who was one of the K1 stars. But Mike was never going to fight a kickboxer. It might be nice, he told the New York Times when they called him, but under the Marquis of Queensberry rules, I don't really feel like getting kicked in the head, you know. Then Mike showed up at a big K1 fight at the Bellagio in Vegas on August 15th. Right after Bob Sapp won his match, he called Mike into the ring and he challenged him. "I'll do it right here," Mike told the crowd. "Get me a pair of shorts and I'll fight him tonight with the Marquis of Queensberry." Sign the contract, big boy, he said. That was the wrestling talk. Mike loved doing these appearances. A few weeks after Mike moved into the Beverly Wilshire, he went to Neverland to see Michael Jackson. He said it was nice hanging out with Michael. He was very low-key then. He asked Mike what he'd been doing, and Mike told Michael that he'd been taking it easy. Rest is good. Rest is real good, Mike. Get as much as you can. Mike didn't know then that Michael couldn't sleep at all. It was weird. Everyone was saying that he was molesting kids. But when Mike was there, Michael had some little kids there who were like thug kids. These were no little punk kids. These guys would have whooped Michael's ass if he tried anything. In April 2004, Mike made an appearance at a big K1 event. Again, they announced that Mike had signed with them to fight and that Mike would make his debut that summer. One of their stars had a press conference and said he looked forward to fighting Mike. I would accept a fight under boxing rules, Jerome Labana said, but as soon as I am in the ring, I'd do whatever the fuck I want. Western boxing or not, I will kick him. Tyson already has bit an ear. Now he's going to eat a size 12 foot. Mike, of course, would have been crazy to fight those monsters. I think he'd rather just go back to his hotel room and chill. Mike's bankruptcy was winding along. In June, Don finally settled the suit. The bankruptcy judge let him only pay $14 million. He had played everybody once again. Mike didn't get no film rights or anything. Monica was the first to get paid out of the settlement. The bankruptcy lawyers wound up costing $14 million. They got paid ahead of the IRS. Mike was still up shit's creek, so he had Shelley Finkel get him a fight. He chose an English boxer named Danny Williams, and Mike signed to fight in Louisville on July the 30th. Williams was the former British heavyweight champion who was on the comeback trail. He had knocked out his last two opponents, but he had lost to Julius Francis, so Mike wasn't too worried about fighting him. Mike was still doing drugs right up until the fight, and he went into the fight weighing 232 pounds, but he was in pretty good shape. Mike's entourage was gone when he walked into the ring. Mike had made his security guy Rick one of his cornermen. Mike rocked Williams in the first round and almost had him out, but he was a smart fighter and he held on to Mike and got through the round. With 30 seconds to go, Mike felt something snap in his left knee after he threw a punch. Mike found out later that he had torn his meniscus, so Mike was fighting on one leg from the second round onwards. Mike still managed to rock him in the second round, but he couldn't move and be elusive, and Williams started pounding Mike pretty good to the body. In the third round, the ref deducted 2 points from Williams for low blows and a late punch. By the fourth, Mike was just out of gas and a stationary target. Williams unleashed a barrage of punches, and between Mike's knee and his lack of conditioning, he just couldn't move. A final right hand sent Mike down. Then Mike was sitting up against the ropes watching as the ref counted him out. That fight just really killed Mike's spirit. He went back to Phoenix to Shelley's house, and he had an operation on his knee. Mike was in a wheelchair for a while and then on crutches. Of course, that was another excuse for him to do drugs. He spent the next few months in a deep depression, just hanging out in the backyard and flying his birds. He finally came out as a conclusion in October when he went to New York to see the Trinidad Mayorga fight at Madison Square Garden. Mike was there with his friend Zip and his new bodyguard from the Bronx. When they walked to the seats in the garden, the people at the fight went nuts. They hadn't seen Mike for a long time, and they were losing it. He got a standing ovation. Mike loved Zip like a brother, but Zip didn't understand that the people were just showing appreciation for Mike. Mike had no money when the new year rolled around. Shelley was pregnant again, and in March they had a daughter named Exodus. Mike called the other Shelley, Shelley Finkel, and told him that he needed to make some quick money. So Shelley Finkel set up a fight with another fighter named Kevin McBride in Washington, D.C. on June 11th. But he was a big fighter, 6'6" and 271 pounds. I think it's quite obvious in hindsight looking back that he should never have been in that ring. He just wasn't at all any remotely like the fighter we once knew. He was just missing wildly. He was standing still. He had no stamina. It was just an ugly fight. And at the end of the sixth round, McBride just leaned on Mike when they were on the ropes. And Mike went down. Just sat there with his legs sprawled out. The bell rang, and he could hardly get up. McBride's corner was working on a cut that he got from a headbutt. Mike sat in his corner and told his new trainer, Jeff Fenech, that it was all over. Mike wasn't going out for the 7th round. Mike met the boxing reporters for the last time after the fight. He walked into the interview room and they gave him a standing ovation. Mike told them to sit down and he repeated the same stuff he had told Jim Gray. Mike wasn't going to fight anymore because he didn't want to disgrace the sport. Mike left the arena as a boxer for the last time. Mike just said to himself, wow, it's over. Now I can really go out and have fun. Mike started buying and sniffing coke when he was 11 years old, but he'd been drinking since he was a baby. Mike comes from a long line of drunks. Mike's mother used to give him Thunderbird or Gordon's gin to make him go to sleep. When he was 10, Mike's friends and he would buy bottles of Mad Dog 2020, Bacardi 151, Brass Monkey, the real cheap stuff that kills your guts. They also started smoking weed and hash. Mike thinks that one reason that he started doing so much coke was because he was in a lot of physical pain from his boxing career. Mike knows some hockey players who told him the same story. When you have that kind of pain, you can't be friendly with anybody. You're like a lion with a hurt paw. When an animal gets hurt, they know that the other animals will attack them. And that's how Mike felt when he was in pain, vulnerable and scared. So you get some coke and then you're in the room alone with the coke, and you want a woman in there because you feel so bad about doing the drug that having a woman is going to kill the guilt. And Mike had no problem getting cocaine, even when he was totally broke. Mike knew a lot of the big drug dealers when they were the little guys just coming up, and he showed them some love. Now they're multimillionaires, they own the big clubs, so when they see Mike, they treat him like a real god. But Mike treats them as if they're still those little guys. Mike just say, I'm going to go somewhere, run me some of those little packages. Or Mike might have just met an absolute stranger that knows the drug man and he'd say, give Mike 2 8-balls on me. When Mike first started using coke heavily, Mike would carry half a brick with him. He was carrying sales weight, but he didn't care. He just wanted to be able to share it and turn all his friends on. Mike would go around and ask people, you want some? People he never dreamed of were doing that stuff. The interesting thing is that these people would sniff his dope and then reprimand him while they were doing it. Mike was hanging out with his friends in LA after the McBride fight, feeling pretty depressed, when his phone rang. It was Jeff Green, a new friend of his. On the face of it, you'd think it was pretty improbable that Jeff and Mike would be friends. Jeff was a Jewish businessman who made $1 billion playing the real estate market. Mike was a Muslim boxer who spent almost $1 billion on bitches and cars and legal fees. Mike met Jeff through a mutual friend and he just clicked. Jeff started coming to Mike's fights in Europe and Mike started travelling around the world with him on his yacht. Jeff would invite Mike over for dinner during Rosh Hashanah. Jeff was worried that Mike would get depressed just thinking about the way he went out of boxing, so Jeff figured that hanging out with some of the most beautiful women in the world and partying might just be the remedy that he needed. Mike went to Saint-Tropez and it was cool. He didn't really feel out of place. He saw some people who he knew and they started taking him around. He would eat breakfast on Jeff's boat and then get on one of his jet skis and he'd be riding around. Some Wall Street guy would see Mike and invite him over to his boat. After Saint-Tropez, they took that boat all over. They went up and down the coast, and every time they stopped at another country, it was chaos when they found out Mike was on Jeff's boat. There's nothing like it. You could get off a plane anywhere and it's like you never left home. You get to meet kings and queens and princes. Everything's carte blanche. People open doors for you. You never have to wait in line to go in a club. You always have a table at the finest restaurants in the world. It was just a wonderful world for Mike to live in. It just seemed like one big blur for him. But one thing Mike did realise is that none of all of that filled the big hole that it had in his soul. Mike never truly respected the championship. It all came very easy. He truly did put in a lot of work to achieve what he did, but he also took it for granted. When they docked in Sicily, they went out to a party, and about 100 people followed them back onto the boat. They all wanted to see Mike and take pictures with him. All of a sudden, the whole boat started tilting and sinking. Everybody wanted to party with him, which was ideal for Mike's demons, no doubt about it. They stopped in Sardinia, and that was off the hook, Mike said. Mike, of course, as we know, is a history buff, so when he thinks of Sardinia, he thinks of the Punic Wars and Hannibal. Mike was vibing on the fact that great wars were fought there. Jeff and Mike stopped into a place called the Billionaire Club. The place lived up to his name, a bottle of champagne costing something like $100,000. Mike partied with drugs and alcohol non-stop from the time that he got out of the ring with Kevin McBride, and after Mike's trips around the world, he settled back into Vegas and established his drug routine. Mike tries to wake up by 10 p.m. and be out of the shower and all pretty and ready to go out by 11 p.m. By then, someone was on the way over, and Mike would do a little coke before he left. Then they'd drive to the Hood in North Vegas and hit the bars until about 1 a.m, unless there was something interesting going on there, like a new drug individual coming to town. Then Mike would hit some clubs on the Strip. There it was all about knowing the matadees, hanging out in the suites and hustling girls, and Mike hung out there until 4 or 5 a.m. When Mike hit the after-hours spots like Jerry's, after staying there for an hour, Mike went to the strip clubs like Seamless that had a crowd that came there to hang out. At these after-hours spots, he'd see everyone from celebrities to beautiful models to hardcore hustlers. You never saw any of them in the daytime. Going to a dentist's office or at a mall, their life was just like Mike's. They'd be sleeping all day and partying all night. So Mike hung out with them one morning after the after-hours club, and they all had beautiful homes. They were either drug dealers or rich, bad seed kids. There were always tons of people hanging out with them at the clubs, and they'd always get the bill. The next thing you know, Mike started sleeping in the strip clubs. Mike got a box of fried chicken, and he was eating it, and then he just passed out from staying up for days on end. Mike was sleeping, and the strippers were eating his chicken and going through his pockets. Then he woke up and started fighting with the G-string divas, not because they were going through his pockets, but because he was eating his chicken, and Mike was ravenously hungry. Of course, if anybody's taken cocaine, not that I have myself, but when you come down from a high, well, they say you're famished. So by November of 2005, Mike was really gone. He went to LA for the premiere of 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying. Mike was really high on cocaine, and Robin was there. She must have seen him running around before the movie started, hitting on girls and just being silly. When the movie was over, Mike got up from his seat, and she was right there. She gave Mike a hug, and he kissed her. Mike was hoping that he might be able to hit it again, but she just went, whoa, and walked away. As soon as she walked away, Mike turned around, and Naomi Campbell grabbed him and hugged him. She must have seen Mike hugging Robin, and she was probably thinking, he shouldn't be hugging that bitch, with all that shit he went through with her. He's hugging her. Naomi pulled out of the hug and looked Mike in the eyes. Mike, the word is out. You're doing a lot of blow. You need to stop. You're fucking your life up. She was mad, and she was reading Mike a couple of paragraphs of the Riot Act. In his words, Nene always cared deeply about him, and vice versa. For him, she was a true friend, but Mike didn't heed her advice. He kept on doing blow. Now, if you get high on coke and you don't have girls around, it's not really a good high. And if you have girls without the coke, that isn't good either. In Mike's opinion, you need both of them for the optimal experience. Around this time, Mike started hanging out with Crocodile again. He would come back from training someone for a fight, and he'd be in full party mode. One time, they were in Mike's hotel room in Vegas with a famous porn star and her boyfriend. They had arranged for her to come to the room to have sex with them. As soon as they came into the room, Crocodile and Mike started taking off the clothes. Her boyfriend supposedly was okay with them both having sex with the porn star, until he saw them naked. In July of 2006, Mike got another visit from the FBI. Mike had been partying the night before, and when he saw an FBI SWAT team coming up the front steps of his house, he ran to the back door, but they were right there too. "Mr. Tyson, we need to talk to you, champ." Oh shit, Mike thought. Whose ass did I grab last night? "We'd like to know your association with this gentleman in the picture. His name is Dale Hausner," one of the agents said. Mike looked at the picture. It showed this guy Dale, and him shaking hands like they were buddies. "Do you know this man? He's a boxing writer and a photographer," the agent said. "I do remember this man. He came to visit me when I was working out in my gym. There were a few of the Mexican fighters there, and they started hassling him. 'Get out of here, you fucking fag,' one of the Mexican fighters said to him. 'The champ don't want to talk to you.' But it was Ramadan, so I interceded and explained to the other fighters that this was the time of peace and that everybody had a place, so I let him interview me. I'm sorry if he was offended in any way. I didn't mean to cause him any discomfort." No, he liked you, Mr. Tyson," the FBI agent said. "He just didn't like the 8 people that he murdered and the other 19 people that he shot. It turned out that the police were investigating Hausner and his friend for a string of drive-by shootings in Arizona from May 2005 through July 2006. It was a good thing that Mike stopped those guys and showed this guy some respect, and we might have been waiting outside the gym to shoot him. At the end of August, Mike got a gig doing boxing exhibitions at the Aladdin Hotel in Vegas. For him, it was a sweet deal. They gave him a nice suite and paid him to work out in a room where they set up a boxing ring. Thousands of people coming through the hotel could see Mike sparring and hitting the heavy bag. He got free food, whatever he wanted. So Mike called all his friends. Bobby Brown was in town, and Mike invited him and Karen Steffens, aka Superhead, the girl he was currently seeing, to come up to see him. Mike had fooled around with her before too, so it was all good, so he thought. She was one of those girls who you couldn't get a hold of that often, but when you did, it was a great time. Bobby didn't want to do that. Mike didn't realise that he was actually serious about her, so Bobby brought his father and some other friends down. They came there first and Mike gave them the royal treatment. Then Bobby came. Mike was down in the lobby when Bobby arrived, and they went up the elevator together. People were going crazy when they saw the two of them. The wife in one couple said, "Oh shit, Mike Tyson and Bobby Brown. These two niggers together. It's on, baby, it's on." They knew that they were trouble. Mike wanted Bobby to chill for a while with him. For Mike, it was great to hang out with Bobby because when he was married to Whitney Houston, she would never let him hang out with Mike, although Mike couldn't blame her, of course. Around this time, Mike started to have difficulty acquiring his coke. It wasn't like there was any shortage of cocaine in Vegas. It was the dealers that didn't want to provide the coke to him. Dealers were always notoriously late when they'd say they'd be there with the stuff, and Mike had no patience sometimes. He wound up copying in a burger joint. Mike's drought began in the ghetto. First, they wouldn't let him in the bathroom of the bars on the west side. Then the drug dealers started refusing service to him. "Go train, Mike. We need you to train," they'd tell him. These guys had grown up with Mike in Vegas, seen him hanging around the barbershop for years, and they didn't want to contribute to his downfall. Mike was always a chauvinist when it came to women. Even if he was broke, he never let them buy him dinner. But when Mike needed money for cocaine, and he saw his girlfriend drop some money, he'd wait and then put it in his pocket. That was one of the worst feelings he ever felt. He didn't want to play with the devil any longer, but the devil still wanted to play, and it wouldn't be over until he said it was over. Mike was so down on money that he even went to Youngstown, Ohio to put a 4-round boxing exhibition on October the 20th with his old sparring partner Corey Sanders. It was promoted by this ex-fighter named Sterling McPherson. Mike didn't remember getting paid for the exhibition, even though Sterling sold 4,000 out of 6,000 seats at prices from $25 to $200 and charged $29.95 for the pay-per-view event. But Mike thought that if he stayed busy, he could get off the drugs. The whole match was a fiasco. Corey came in at 300 pounds, about 50 pounds bigger than Mike. Corey wore headgear, and the crowd booed him for that. They began to spar, and Mike got in a good shot and dropped Corey in the first round. Mike had him in trouble in the third and the fourth, but he didn't press it. Mike didn't have any hurting in his heart back then. As soon as the exhibition was over, Mike went back to Vegas and got higher and higher. During this whole crazy period when Mike was doing all these drugs and bringing in hookers, Mike used to hear cuss in his head every day. But Mike didn't give a fuck because cuss wasn't there in the flesh. Living wasn't a big priority for Mike then. Now all he wants to do is live. But back then, in the prime of his life, it meant nothing to him. By the time Mike was the champ at 20, so many of his friends were dead or decimated. Some of them were sent away to prison for so long that when they came back out, they were zombies. They didn't know what planet they were on. Some even did something intentionally to get back behind bars. Mike always prided himself on his discipline, but withdrawing from coke was a hard one. Every pain you ever got from boxing came back during the withdrawals. The coke and the liquor were like Novocaine to him. Once Mike stopped doing all that, all his arthritis came roaring back. He was a cripple. He couldn't walk. His feet hurt so bad. Even today, Mike still has to get cortisone injections every once in a while to get him through the pain. Mike kept to the straight and narrow at Wonderland. There were temptations. A famous young actress was in there with him. She was going out every night with her friends. 4 or 5 limos or Benzes would come and pick them up. It was a whole convoy. She had a black guy who was running the show for her, and he invited Mike to come along one night. Mike wanted to go so bad. It was still in him, but he resisted. But these kids were bending the rules right and left. One rich kid actually snuck a 50-inch flat-screen TV into his room so he could play his video games. They caught him and took it right out. After a while, Mike got into a rhythm. He threw himself into his meetings. Mike did the 12-step work better than anyone. He was the poster boy for doing the work. Everybody was required to go to 1 meeting a day. Mike would go to 3 or 4. Marilyn came to visit him about 3 months after he got there, and he took her to one of his meetings on the Sunset Strip. Mike passed the basket around to get donations for the coffee and tea. Then, when the meeting was over, he put away the chairs and swept and mopped the floor. He felt good doing that stuff. He still had conflicting feelings about it all. A lot of his heroes were losers when it came to managing their lives, but were champions in their field. People wanted to get them off alcohol and drugs to save them, but sometimes without the alcohol and drugs, they'd lose their great qualities. The people in Mike's life were happy when he was sober, but Mike was miserable. He just wanted to die. But he always had Marilyn in his face when he thought like that. "What are you talking about? You're going to be in the program," she'd yell. She'd go from a nice white-haired lady to a demon. It was meant for that lady to be in his life. The thing is, you can be so caught up in your vice, you don't even realise how sick you actually are. And Mike equates sickness with blisters or dripping, not psychological illness. Because of Mike's celebrity, they wanted him to go to the closed meetings. Mike went to a few of them, and he was shocked. He saw some of the biggest names in the world in those rooms, and they liked him. They thought he was a badass. They would say, "Mike, you need money?" And they'd have someone put cash in Mike's account. One thing that Mike found out in those meetings was that everybody knows when you're getting high. One time, Mike saw this world-famous actor, one of the biggest, at a closed meeting. He greeted him and he said, "Hey, we've been waiting for you here. I have a seat reserved for you." And Mike said he was like, how the hell did he know that I was using? But if you're using, everybody who is using knows you're using. The closed-door meetings, however, weren't Mike's thing. He went about 4 times, but he had to go back to the regular meetings. All the guys in the closed programs were elitists, so they were going to run their own program. Mike had to do Bill W's program. He had to be in there with the masses. Mike said he owed Marilyn a debt that can never be repaid for getting him into recovery. It's a fascinating world. You think that cops got the biggest fraternity in the world. You think gangs are big. They're nothing compared to the recovery world. They got federal judges, marshals and prosecutors. You have to be careful about what recovering alcoholic or addict you're fucking with, because this one, well, it's a huge, powerful family. Don't ever underestimate the power of recovery, because if you do, you're going down. They've got the ear of everyone, including the president. Mike said they're a motley crew too. He saw ex-Hells Angels, ex-gangbangers, strange guys whose sole purpose in life is to get people to stop drinking and stop getting high. Some of these guys have been in prison for most of their lives, and their goal in life now is to save as many people as possible and get them to live life on life's terms and to face their fears sober. Well, these type of people are special people, Marilyn included. They're a different kind of people. Going to Wonderland for his recovery was really a turning point in Mike's life. He could relate to the idea of improving himself. Custody Amato had drilled that into him years earlier. But it was hard because all those drugs had suppressed all the good stuff that Mike had. But just to get back into a daily rhythm, go to work out, go to his meetings and go to dinner with his peers, for him it was great. And when Mike saw all these other people who were supposed to be incurable addicts doing so well at meetings, his competitive streak kicked in. He just jumped seeing that. If those guys could do it, Mike knew he could too. Mike wasn't going to let anyone outdo him. Mike knew that his life was on the line when he was in Wonderland. He was really trying to win. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, when you stay clean for a certain amount of time, they gave you a token or a chip. Mike carried those tokens with him religiously. That was just the way Mike lived, and he was wired. Those tokens to him were like his belts. In their community, the tokens infer respect. You could have all the money in the world, but no tokens, no time, and they don't respect you. Mike just loved it. He always looked forward to getting his chips. It looked very impressive when Mike showed the judge all his community service. He got wonderful letters from his doctors and counsellors in rehab, and supportive letters from his friends like Sugar Ray Leonard and the great lawyer Robert Shapiro. The fact that Mike had voluntarily entered rehab and done so well impressed the judge, who was a nice liberal lady. She could have put Mike away for years for possession of coke, but instead she sentenced him to 24 hours in jail, 360 hours of community service, and put him on probation for 3 years. Everything was looking good. Even Monica had been supportive of him during the whole process. Mike would have been in the streets without her help. Mike and Monica were a horrible married couple, but they were great friends. Monica had arranged a nice lunch for all Mike's attorneys, and after that Mike was going to fly straight back to California and buy a house and continue his recovery work. Everything was looking good, until the district attorney decided to make one last example out of Mike. They found out that Wonderland was within a certain distance from a school, and, as an offender, a registered sex offender, he had to be registered with the state to be in place in such close proximity. So they told Mike that if he flew back to California, the state of Arizona was going to have the LAPD arrest him at the airport. It was actually Wonderland's fault for not registering him. When Mike found out about this, one of his lawyers told him that he could sue Wonderland. He couldn't believe that. These people had stuck their necks out and saved Mike's life, and now he was supposed to sue them. There was no way he was going to do that. But the alternative was that he could start doing drugs again. His plan to go back to his nurturing community in California had been shot down. They should have sent Mike right back to California, but they brought Mike to Phoenix, and without that support system, Mike got high 6 weeks later. And that was the end of his relationship with Paula, a woman that Mike had met at the rehab centre. They visited each other a couple of times, but it just wasn't going to work. Mike was starting to go astray, getting back into the drug world, and she was on the straight and narrow. Mike wasn't fully back to being a full-blown cokehead. He was on so many meds from the rehab people that he was pretty much zombied out. Now that Mike wasn't going to start a new life in California, he decided to sell the house he had in Phoenix and buy a home in Las Vegas. Mike wanted to be where the real action was, so he bought a house in Henderson. After Mike moved into his new house in Vegas, after his sentencing on the Phoenix coke bust, he was depressed. The doctors from Wonderland had Mike on so many meds, like he was zombified. Daryl was really worried about Mike. He said, "You're not looking good, Mike. You're okay." "Listen, I got Kiki's number. I know she makes you happy every time you talk to her. Can I get her on the line?" So they called her, and Mike told her to come visit him. Kiki had just broken up with a guy, and she was depressed. She later told Mike that she was finally getting over him, and that she asked her mother if she could come visit. "What do you have to lose? You always have such a good time with him," Rita said. Kiki came out in January of 2008 to visit, and the minute Mike laid eyes on her, it was like his whole perception of her changed. Wow, she's hot, he thought. Maybe it was because he was seeing her when he was sober for the first time. She had blossomed into a beautiful woman. Mike really wanted to see if being committed to one person could actually work for him. But they were both pretty depressed at that time. Mike was trying to stay clean after his rehab, and Kiki had been dealing with a family crisis for the past few years. Mike wanted to party in New York, but that plan got derailed when Mike was accused of putting a $50,000 for a hit on a guy who had allegedly killed his buddy Daryl Homicide Baum back in 2000. This came out at a trial of one of the Cash Money Brothers organisation that controlled the drug traffic in some of the projects in Brooklyn. Supposedly, one of the guys who murdered Homicide heard about the bounty, and then he put out a hit on Mike's head. And that was it, almost carried out in the summer of 2000 when Mike was in Brooklyn. He had been spotted in one of his Range Rovers on Atlantic Avenue, but some of the Cash Money guys objected to killing him because he was a Muslim. All of that was bullshit, of course, but just mentioning Mike's name in connection with hits on drug dealers helped perpetuate the idea that he was some crazy hardcore guy. Mike was on probation then too, so now they were telling him that he can't even go to his hometown. That was the world Mike grew up in. All his friends killed people, robbed the drugs. Mike went one direction and they went the other, but they kept in touch. Now Mike was getting dragged back into that world, and it was a nightmare. He felt like his whole world was caving in on him. So Mike stayed out of the West and kept getting fucked up. He took one of his girlfriends to the premiere of Will Smith's new film, £7, in December. Kiki saw a picture of Mike and the girl on the red carpet while she was in jail and flipped out. Mike was flipping out too, but it was because he was feeling like shit. Mike called his old friend Hope right before the after party was going to begin and asked her to come and get him. She drove up to the place and Mike ran out, got into a car and left his girl and his bodyguards back in the party. He just had to get away. His bodyguards were calling, all freaked out, and Mike put Hope on the phone. "I'll be fine, just let me give him some space. I'll bring him back." But Mike didn't want to go back. He just wanted to disappear. Hope took him back and she came to the party with them. Later that month, he went to one of his usual clubs in Vegas. Mike was going to his spot in the VIP area when he saw that there was a big crowd around the rope. Some of the big drug guys who normally sat in the VIP section were being refused admittance by the bouncer. But when the bouncer saw Mike, he let him right in. So Mike took up his normal spot at his table and started drinking his Hennessy. There were a bunch of people at the next table drinking and having fun, and Mike looked over at them, thinking to himself, "Who the fuck do they think they are sitting over here? This is a house spot." Then Mike saw one of the Olsen twins, so now he was figuring that this was a showbiz crowd. All these white people were looking over at Mike, the black interloper in the corner. But this was Mike's place. In Mike's mind, he was some cool Las Vegas big shot. Then all of a sudden, comic actor Zach Galifianakis came over to him. "Hey, we're shooting a movie with you in 2 weeks, Zach said." Mike's reply, "The fuck you are? For real?" Zach laughed. He must have thought Mike was putting him on it, but it was news to him. Mike didn't even know anything about any movie. He was doing his normal meet and greet to pick up enough money to keep him on drugs. Well, if he had a movie, that was cool to him. "Let's go and do the movie," he said. He actually had no idea what the hell he was getting himself into at this point. Zach said, "Come and sit with us and have a drink." Mike said he was a great guy. In a couple of weeks, Mike was on the set of The Hangover. He was fat, out of shape and moody, but Todd Phillips, the director, and those actors were just awesome. Mike didn't know if they thought he was going to be some psycho on the set, but Todd and the producers were all over him the entire time. "Is everything okay? Do you want to take a break?" That's what Todd would say to him. "Can you do one more take now? You don't have to do it if you don't want to." Mike was just happy to work. Mike had been asking God to give him another chance, and he would never get high again, even though Mike couldn't stop using coke. Mike was high on coke the entire time they shot The Hangover. Mike had one of his girlfriends with him on the set, and then Sean or his friends stopped in to see the filming. He took one look at Mike's girl ass and shook his head. Mike loved being on the set. They put up these craft service tables just stocked with the best cookies, cake and food. Mike was stopping scenes to go and get some more of the cookies. He didn't expect much from this film, but Todd kept telling him how this was going to be a huge movie and that Mike would be on top again after it came out. For him, that was cool, but it was more exciting for Mike just to be able to entertain people again. He realised that even when he was a fighter, entertaining the people was more paramount than winning the fights. Cus D'Amato always had Mike around all these charismatic show business and media people with magnetic personalities. Mike realised that Cus was all about the arts. When Cus talked about putting his thoughts in other people's minds, that was an art too, even if it was a dark art. The art of war, the art of survival. They always looked at everything as art. Mike's not a good artist, but he knows the arts. It was like when he said that he wasn't a good fighter, but he knew he had to fight real good. Kiki actually gave birth to Mike's daughter, Milan, on the 24th of December 2008. She had just been released from jail, and she went to a hospital in Philadelphia where Milan was induced because she was a couple of weeks late. Kiki called to tell Mike, and he was stunned. That was his mother's birthday. Mike had gotten a small apartment for Kiki near his house in Vegas and had fixed it up for her and the baby. She was about to come out when fate intervened. Mike had a dirty urine test and the Phoenix people were thinking about putting Mike back in jail. But Mike's lawyer convinced them that rehab would be better for Mike. So in January 2009, Mike checked himself into a posh rehab in Malibu called Promises. Promises was good. Mike was in this mansion. It was just like doing rehab at home. Here Mike would go to meetings and also see his therapist. They were working Mike from all angles so he could get a good report and get off his drug case. Everything was going good until 4 weeks in. Mike's time was up. He didn't want to leave, but they had already booked someone else for Mike's room. He really wasn't well yet. So Mike called his friend Jeff Green and told him to come and get him. Jeff picked Mike up and took him to a friend's house, a guy who owned one of those energy drink companies. Jeff didn't know it, but there was a full-fledged party going on at the house, complete with lots of pretty young girls. "Sit right here, Mike. Don't move," Jeff said. But of course the party came to Mike, and he was soon surrounded by beautiful women in the bathing suits. Jeff was going to take Mike to another rehab the next day, so Mike was going to stay at Jeff's house that night. So Jeff put the clamps on Mike. He couldn't move. He couldn't flirt with the girls. Mike was Jeff's prisoner. Eventually they went home, and the next day Jeff drove Mike to a branch of Promises that was in West LA. Mike said, "Hey Jeff, I'm flat broke. You're going to have to pay for this. Man, I just want to get well, okay?" Jeff and Mike sat down to talk to the administration lady who would check Mike in. Mike saw that she had a Star of David on. She left to go and get some forms to fill out, and Mike pounced on Jeff. "Look, Jeff, she's one of your people. This is going to be good. We're going to get a good deal. They know the protocol. Talk to her, Jeff." She came back and sat down, but she was playing hardball. She wasn't giving nobody no play. Every time she said another aspect of treatment, it was more money. $3,000 for this, $4,000 for that, $25,000 for another thing. You can take another pill, that's another $5,000. Jeff was plotzing, as he would say, as he heard how much money he was going to have to lay out. "What the fuck, Mike? God, man, you better get sober." On January the 21st, the rehab let Mike out for a day to attend the US premiere of his documentary film at Sundance. His friend Shauno came with him as a sober companion. And that was the first time that Mike was going to see Milan. They met Kiki at the airport. She came off the plane with their little girl, and she was all bummy looking like a homeless person. Mike was looking at Milan saying hi, trying to see if she looked like him. Kiki was crying at the airport, and Mike was still fucked up from the drugs in his system, so Mike didn't really have much empathy for her. Even seeing Milan was strange. It was almost like, well, here's another out-of-wedlock baby again. I could do another one. It wasn't the response Mike and Kiki anticipated. Mike didn't even think he kissed Kiki when he saw her. It was just awkward. The next morning, Mike went back to rehab in LA, and Kiki and Milan went to the townhouse apartment that Mike had set up for them in Vegas. Kiki was all alone because her mum was still in a halfway house in Philly because of her conviction. Mike talked to Kiki from Promises, and she was all depressed, but so was he. She didn't have much compassion for him then. She just saw Mike as a big spoilt brat moaning about things while he was laying a country club for junkies. But the Promises branch Mike was in was nothing like the one in Malibu. It was in town, on the corner of some street where anybody could go in and kidnap you or something. Kiki was really stressed about money then because Mike couldn't give her anything for the baby. She could barely afford diapers. She even threatened to take their child down to the welfare centre and sign up for assistance. But Mike was really broke. He had something like $7,000 in his bank account, and he owed over $8,000 a month in child support payments. Jeff was paying for Mike's rehab. Whenever Mike could, he booked an appearance for $10,000 to get some cash. So threatening to go on welfare didn't really faze him. Mike told Kiki she wasn't going to be living in the lap of luxury with him. He basically said, she's going to have to get in the welfare line. In February, Mike got out of rehab and went back to Vegas. His plan was that he would live in his house and go and visit Kiki and the baby, who were in the nearby townhouse. But Mike was so fucked up and fragile from rehab that he went over to the townhouse and just stayed there with Kiki for 2 weeks. Mike was literally afraid to leave the house because he didn't trust himself to stay clean. Kiki and Mike picked up where they left off before she went to prison. They laughed a lot and talked and watched TV and played with Milan. After 2 weeks, Crocodile started coming around, and Mike and he went to Mac's barbershop and would hang out for a couple of hours in the afternoon. But Mike was staying out of trouble. While Mike and Kiki lived together, they were so broke that when they went shopping, they would have to count the items in the cart, just to be certain that they didn't go over the budget. As they shopped, Mike would keep taking things out of the cart even though Kiki had assured him she had counted correctly. Mike just didn't want to be embarrassed at the checkout counter. The last time he remembered doing that was when his mother was on welfare. The checkout lady would have to put stuff aside that they wanted to purchase because they didn't have enough money. All that anxiety came back to Mike when Kiki and he would shop. Mike's concept of buying things his whole adult life had been whatever he could see, he could buy. Now, the sight of ordinary groceries actually intimidated him. Can you imagine that? Mike, one of the most vicious, feared fighters of his generation, and the price of a box of cereal was intimidating him. Kiki and Mike continued to bond. They played a lot of trivia games just for days on end. Trivia. And Mike was still too sick to go out and face the world. Kiki was probably secretly happy that she had Mike for herself. Mike thinks that his old image was still weighing heavy on her though. A few weeks after Kiki and Mike moved in together, he left the house with Crocodile in the afternoon. They went to the gym to watch some fighters train, but this time after they did that, Mike told Crocodile he wanted to get some blow. Mike got back to the townhouse at about 10, which was really late for him. Kiki was asleep upstairs and Mike went into the bedroom, all happy, talking real hyper. And Kiki popped out of her bed like Linda Blair in The Exorcist. "You did coke, didn't you?" "No, baby," he replied. "Then why the fuck are you talking so fast? And fuck that Crocodile. He's supposed to be helping you, and he's going off and doing drugs with you." "Oh, don't say anything to Crocodile," he replied. "He doesn't know I did it." "You really think I'm stupid and I'm supposed to believe that he doesn't know?" Kiki then kicked Mike out of the house for doing coke. Mike saw it as her doing him a favour. He was happy to go. At that time, Mike would rather be out doing coke than cooped up in that small apartment. So he went and binged on cocaine for 2 days, and then he went back. Kiki was worried as hell, but Mike vowed not to slip up again, and things returned to normal. Until March, at least, when Kiki's mum Rita got out of the halfway house and moved in with him. Having 4 of them in that cramped apartment wasn't fun, especially when one of them was your girlfriend's mother. Mike couldn't even make love without the possibility of a mother hearing them because the walls were so thin. During all this troubled time, Kiki kept her spirits up. She was always so optimistic. Mike was ODing, left and right, and she was talking about them starting their own production company and licensing Mike's image for all sorts of things. She always had positive dreams for them, and Mike had some dreams too. Seeing Kiki and Milan on a daily basis and seeing the hope she had for all of them seeped through that drug fog that Mike was in. One day he woke up and said to himself, "I ain't going to do this shit no more." Mike wanted to be awake. He wanted to be of service. He wanted to be a player in the game of life, functioning with all your marbles and responding to the best of your ability. That was the life that Mike wanted to live. But then Mike gets that phone call that no parent should ever have to get in their lifetime. It was Shelley, the mother of 2 of his children, calling from Phoenix. "My baby's dead. My baby's dead." Mike was numb when he hung up the phone. Daryl rushed over and they drove to the airport. Kiki and Rita and Milan got in the car and Zip drove them to Phoenix. When Mike got there, he rushed to the hospital. To this day, Mike doesn't understand what happened or why it happened. All he knew was that the safety cord from the treadmill somehow got tied around his 4-year-old daughter's neck. Mike's son found his sister like that. He ran and got Shelley and she called 911. When Mike got to the hospital, Exodus was on life support with no hope of recovering. He was furious. He wanted to make someone pay, but then he was surrounded by the parents of other children who were in the hospital dying. They were coming over to Mike to comfort him. Now Mike was a member of a club that nobody had ever wanted to join, the Bereaved Parents Club. Losing Exodus was the most bitter and helpless feeling Mike had ever had in his life. Now his son, Mikkel, will never be the same. He will always have that image in his head of finding his sister hanging. How do you heal from a tragedy like that? It's not in the AA book. Losing Exodus is the only thing in Mike's life that he can't find any gratitude for. Someone has to pay and take the pain, even if it's him. Even all these years later, the pain is still just as raw for him. Kiki and the others had checked into the W Hotel. Mike went back there that night because he was shattered and drained. Everyone tried to console him, but how the hell do you console somebody who's just lost a child? Mike was trying to keep it together, but he would just break down in tears, and then he would take these really deep breaths, and the last thing he wanted to do was to get high. Then Kiki gave him some Chinese herbal medicine to stay calm. Exodus was taken off life support the next day. She sadly passed away. At a funeral, Mike didn't know what to do. You have to stand up and thank everyone for coming and be grateful for everyone's support. So Mike got up. "Thank you very much for coming. He managed to get that out, but he didn't know what the hell he was supposed to do, so he sat down. But then his son Amir got up there and began talking. Even though Mike was in grief, he was still rational, and he was checking him out, and Amir was telling stories about his sister, and he was doing it very calmly, very professionally. What the hell is going on here, he thought, Mike. Here was this big brother talking on behalf of his sister. He did such an awesome job. Once he was through, Mike felt much better. Exodus had a funeral worthy of a dignitary. They used to listen to Spanish music in the house, and she had a favourite artist, a reggae star from Panama. Mike called up Luis de Cuba, who put him in touch with Roberto Duran. Roberto's son reached out to the artist, and he came and sang and played, and it was wonderful for them. Mike didn't realise it until then, but he suddenly knew the deep reason that he had always loved Duran. There was no way Mike can ever repay Roberto Duran for getting the artist to perform to honour Mike's daughter. After the funeral, they stayed in Phoenix for a few days and then drove back to Vegas. Mike brought his son, Miguel, back with him because Shelley wasn't handling Exodus's death that well. Mike's oldest daughter, Mikey, came back with them too. So now there were Mike, Kiki, Rita, and all the kids in that tiny townhouse. After the tragic death of Exodus, Mike's whole life shifted. He realised that everything he always thought was the truth was a lie. So Mike had to start his life all over again. He wanted to create some sort of legacy for Exodus up there in heaven. He wanted her to know that her father was conducting himself in a dignified manner and that he was dealing with his fury and taking it to a whole other level of life. Mike had lost Exodus, but he had Milan. He wanted Milan to have a sister, close in age, so that they could grow up together. Mike really believes in his heart that Milan was a gift to him to help him through this tragedy. Even though she could never take Exodus's place, this was a chance for him to be a responsible dad with her. And then from being that guy with her, Mike could work on recreating his relationship with his other children. For years and years, Mike had gone through the motions of going to AA meetings and reading the book and working on his program. Then all of a sudden his daughter died and that knowledge just kicked in without him even knowing it. Just auto drive. It didn't happen overnight, and Mike had some slips down the road, but it was there in him. Mike, work on your lust. Mike, work on your conduct with women. Mike, put that blow away. Mike, lose that weight and get healthy. Mike, don't look at a woman longer than 3 seconds. He didn't want to sound too spooky like he's possessed or anything, but the rehab teachings, well, it just clicked in his head. Mike knew he had great discipline from his time with Cuss, but everything Mike had done with Cuss was from a posture of being superior to everyone else. Now Mike was using those same tools, but from a different point of view, from humility, not superiority. Mike made a choice. Slowly, imperfectly, but deliberately, he committed to rebuilding his life from the inside out. He embraced fatherhood. He worked towards sobriety. He faced his past without running from it. The man once known only for violence began speaking openly about vulnerability, accountability and growth. He didn't pretend to be healed. He chose to be honest. And through his one-man show Undisputed Truth, interviews and public reflection, Mike showed the world something unexpected. A champion learning how to live without armour. Still, a part of Mike's soul belonged to the ring. In 2020, during a time when the world felt uncertain and fragile, training footage of Mike Tyson surfaced online. Not as a spectacle, but as a reminder. The movements were sharp, the focus was real, the fire was controlled. At 54 years of age, Tyson wasn't chasing youth. He was honouring purpose. That's when the moment found its meaning in one name. Roy Jones Jr. It was a fight about respect, not revenge. Roy Jones Jr. was everything Mike wasn't. Fluid, fast, artistic, one of the most skilled boxers to ever lace up the gloves. They never had fought in the prime, but now they shared something deeper. Experience, humility and respect. The bout was an exhibition. 8 rounds, no official winner. But the intention was clear. This fight wasn't about proving who was better, it was about proving that greatness doesn't expire. November 28, 2020 was fight night. And from the opening bell it was clear that this wasn't nostalgia. Mike actually moved forward with purpose, attacking the body with discipline and control. Roy Jones circled with intelligence and calm, choosing precision over panic. And when the final bell rang, the fight was ruled a draw. Both men stood, tired, bruised and proud. They had already won. They showed the world that age doesn't erase identity and that discipline can outlast time. That night wasn't about a comeback. It was a confirmation that he had survived his darkest moments, a confirmation that pain didn't define him, a confirmation that growth is possible at any stage of life. From that moment forward, Mike stepped into a fully new chapter of his life. Mentor, storyteller, entrepreneur, and voice of experience. No longer running from his past, using it to teach, inspire, and connect. Fast forward 4 years, and in a move that captivated global attention, Mike returned to competitive boxing, taking on social media star turned boxer Jake Paul in a high-profile sanctioned bout streamed on Netflix. Despite being 58 and far past his athletic peak, Mike's presence electrified audiences and reminded the world of his enduring star power. Even as Paul won a unanimous decision, and whilst Mike didn't look fantastic, it still reinforced that his prime was behind him, but the match reintroduced Mike as both a performer and a symbol, blending that nostalgia with the spectacle and solidifying his status as a living legend in modern culture. Today, Mike Tyson stands as one of sport's most compelling transformations. He remains deeply involved in the cannabis business, serving in an executive role that blends personal passion with commercial savvy. His podcasts and public appearances keep him in conversation across generations. Mike continues openly exploring what it means to live with pain, loss, resilience, and reinvention, a life forged in violence and tempered through vulnerability. Now, to wrap up this episode and the Mike Tyson Career Profile, there's a few quotes to bring out to you. First of all, Anthony Joshua, heavyweight champion of the world in the UK. He said, "We need to pay homage to the GOAT that paved the way." Muhammad Ali once said, "Mike Tyson is the only heavyweight I ever feared." Mike himself said, "Boxing is the ultimate challenge. There is nothing that can compare to testing yourself the way you do every time you step in the ring." He also said, "I'm grateful for every experience, even the painful ones." And I'm going to leave you with this final one. Discipline is doing what you hate to do, but doing it like you love it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the Mike Tyson Career Profile. It has been one hell of a journey through Mike's life. 9 parts, 9 episodes, surplus 10 hours of this story. This has to be one of the greatest podcasts that I've ever done. Purely for the fact that we've got so much information, and being able to retell Mike's story with so much information, so many different stories, as far-fetched as some may seem, there are stories nevertheless. We've took you through a definitive journey of his life and his career. I've really loved it. The education, what it's taught me, what I hope it's taught you guys listening. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to re-deliver this episode. You might note that we did this episode very early on in this journey on the podcast network. It was me and Johnston. It wasn't the same as what it is now. It was 2 guys talking about their experiences of Mike Tyson growing up, what they saw, the big fights. But this was just completely something different. So immersive, so educating. And I hope that you guys have taken the same things away from it that I have, delivering it to you all. If you have, and if you've enjoyed it, or if you've not enjoyed it, do go and let me know. You can do that on Spotify by leaving a comment below. If you've been watching the series on Mike Tyson through YouTube, please leave comments below on the episodes that we've put out there. It really is appreciated. Thank you so much to everybody that has been supporting this podcast, this episode, this series. It's been amazing. A special thanks goes out to Hassan, who joined me on this journey in summer last year. And this was one of the biggest challenges that was going to be put straight on his lap, was doing this episode, doing this career profile on Mike Tyson. When we first started out on this journey, we honestly didn't think it were going to be 9 episodes. But as time went on, the research got bigger and longer. We realised that to give it justice, to give it definitive outcomes, we wanted to do it as much as we could. So 9 episodes is the longest career profile I've ever done. It's like a series on its own. I hope it's been worth it. Please let me know if it hasn't, and if it's been too much, too long, because I will do my best to make sure that in future we don't put it as long. But I didn't want to miss any stories out. I didn't want people to feel like we could have done more. And maybe there are other things that might have been left out of these episodes. But I always say to you guys that I've been following this network for a long time. And for those that don't follow it for a long time or dip in and out, we have other episodes on the network. Legendary Nights have multiple episodes involving Tyson, including Lennox Lewis and Frank Bruno and Evander Holyfield, more in-depth conversations. Obviously, we've got the career profile. There's just so much out there, so many times that we've kind of covered Tyson in different ways that, if you're a massive Tyson fan, if we haven't covered it in these 9 episodes, it'll certainly be there in the other 3 or 4 across the network. So please do go and listen to them if you haven't already done so. They are on the network. You can just put a search in, put Mike Tyson on the Legendary Nights podcast, and you'll find the episodes with him in. I just want to say a big thank you also to those that subscribe via Patreon. I really appreciate the support you've been giving me over the past few years. It's really helpful. It has massively helped support this episode and this series on Mike Tyson through the Career Profiles podcast. Getting additional books, different things out there, different literature. It does cost money. Nothing is for free these days. And you have to go out there and get literature. And some of these things you might not have heard before. I know I certainly didn't hear about some of these stories prior to doing this. And some of them might feel really far-fetched. But there are stories nevertheless, and you make your own mind up as to whether you believe them or not. I'm not telling you these are stories. I'm not saying these definitively happened. But there's certainly some great stories out there that we've covered across the 9 episodes. So again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and bearing with me while I get these episodes out. This will be the end of Career Profiles for a period of time now. We will be moving on to another show, but we will be back probably towards the end of 2026. I've already had a couple of requests for new episodes, and I will certainly endeavour to try and do those for those that have been requesting them. I've had names like James Tony thrown at me, Kostya Zoo thrown at me. If you do have any recommendations that you want us to cover, please do let me know. And you can do that on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network Facebook page by messaging, or on Instagram by messaging. If you want to do it on X/Twitter, message on there. Even if you listen and you've found us via TikTok, you can do it on there. Just let me know. I've had recommendations so far. I've had a few. If anybody wants to throw any more at me, throw them at me. I'll make a list of them. I'll get them prepared. And then later in the year, when we move back into this show, we'll certainly look at getting some of those out. But this is it. The Mike Tyson Career Profiles saga is officially over. Thank you so much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed Mike Tyson's Career Profile on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.